James Whitmore sat in his sleek corner office, staring out at the city skyline, but his mind was elsewhere. Whitmore's table was more than a restaurant chain. It was a labor of love, built from the ground up with a promise of quality, warmth, and tradition. Every dish on the menu carried a story. Every ingredient was carefully selected. But now, something was threatening the very foundation of that trust. Rumors had been surfacing for weeks, whispers of a stolen recipe. Not just any recipe, but the signature sauce that had set Whitmore's table apart from every competitor in the game. The sauce was a guarded secret, known only to a select few. His executive chef, a handful of senior kitchen staff, and himself. Yet somehow diners, food critics, and even rival chefs had begun murmuring about its mysterious availability elsewhere. It was impossible, at least that's what James wanted to believe. But deep down he knew better. He set his whiskey glass on the polished desk, the ice clinking softly. Numbers and reports could only tell him so much. He needed to see the truth for himself, to step away from boardrooms and press releases, and immerse himself in the heart of his own business. That night, James shed the identity of a powerful CEO. Gone were the tailored suits and polished shoes. Instead, he donned faded jeans, a slightly worn hoodie, and a ball cap pulled low over his face. He deliberately let his stubble grow out, adding to the illusion of an everyday customer. No one would glance twice at him this way. He was just another diner, another face in the crowd. The restaurant he chose was one of his most successful locations, a flagship store in the bustling heart of the city. The evening air carried the inviting aroma of roasted herbs and seared meats as he approached. The glow of the restaurant's sign bathed the sidewalk in warm, golden light. Through the large front windows, he saw couples clinking wine glasses, families leaning into shared laughter, servers weaving effortlessly between tables with steaming plates. A sense of pride flickered in his chest. This was what Whitmore's table was meant to be. A place where people didn't just eat, but experienced something memorable. But his pride was tainted with unease. Was it all still as he had envisioned? Or had something slipped through the cracks while he wasn't looking? He stepped inside, the familiar scent of rosemary, garlic, and freshly baked bread welcoming him like an old friend. No one gave him a second glance. Perfect. He walked past the host stand, subtly scanning the room. He wasn't here to enjoy a meal. He was here to listen, and he wouldn't leave until he had answers. The soft hum of conversation filled the restaurant, blending seamlessly with the gentle clinking of cutlery against porcelain plates. James Whitmore took a seat near the back, choosing a quiet corner where he could observe without drawing attention. The leather booth felt familiar, a subtle reminder of the countless nights he had spent designing every detail of this place. From the dim, ambient lighting to the polished mahogany tables, everything had been carefully curated to reflect warmth and elegance. But tonight, James wasn't here to admire his creation. He was here to uncover the truth. He picked up the menu, pretending to browse while his ears remained sharp, filtering through the sea of voices around him. The rhythmic steps of servers passing by, the occasional pop of a wine cork, and the murmur of guests chatting about their days. And then something else, a conversation just a few tables away, that made his pulse slow. "I'm telling you, it's the real thing," one voice said, low but brimming with confidence. James kept his gaze down, lifting the menu slightly to cover his face as he focused on the speakers. A man, likely in his mid-50s, sat at a nearby table with three others, two men and a woman, all impeccably dressed. The kind of people who carried themselves with a quiet arrogance, like they had the world in their pockets. The man speaking leaned forward, his fork twirling absently in his fingers. "The signature sauce," he continued, a smirk playing at the edge of his lips. "You know, the one they swear is locked behind some secret vault? Turns out it's not as protected as they'd like to think." Laughter rippled across the table. James felt his stomach tighten. He remained still, letting the words sink in. "No way," the woman scoffed, swirling the wine in her glass. "You mean to tell me someone actually got their hands on it?" The first man nodded, casting a glance around as if ensuring no one else was listening. "Let's just say I know a guy, and that guy has connections, real ones." He set his fork down, leaning in. "I've seen the recipe myself. James felt his grip tighten around the edge of the menu. This wasn't just idle gossip. This was something real, something dangerous. Another man at the table let out a low whistle. "You sure it's legit?" "Down to the last ingredient," the first man confirmed, tapping a finger against the table. "And get this, they're planning to use it. Competing restaurants. Imagine that." A hush fell over the table. Then another round of laughter. James forced himself to breathe evenly, his mind racing. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a direct attack. His family's recipe, the one his grandfather had perfected and passed down, was out there, being toyed with like some cheap trick. One of the men reached for his drink, shaking his head in amusement. "I mean, I get it, the stuff is gold. But who's stupid enough to steal from Whitmore's table?" James lowered his menu just slightly, eyes locking onto the group for the first time. He was about to find out. James gripped the edges of the menu, his knuckles whitening as he forced himself to stay composed. The laughter from the table nearby had softened, replaced with a hushed but deliberate tone. Every syllable carried weight, each word a slow knife twisting deeper into his gut. "Listen," the older man said, his voice smooth, assured, the kind of tone that belonged to someone who had never once questioned their own power. "It's all there, down to the last measurement. The exact blend of herbs, the precise reduction time. I even know the finishing ingredient, the one that gives it that kick. You ever wonder why no one else has been able to replicate it? That's why." James felt his breath catch in his throat. He knew the recipe he was talking about. He had seen it handwritten in his grandfather's notebook, the same closely guarded secret that had been kept for decades, passed down only to the most trusted members of his kitchen. And yet, here it was, being dissected like an open book by strangers in his own restaurant. The woman across from the older man leaned in, her fingers absently tracing the rim of her wine glass. "And you're sure this isn't just some knockoff version? Because I've seen imitators try before." "Oh, it's real," he assured her, a knowing smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It came straight from the source." James's pulse quickened. The source? His stomach twisted at the implication. Someone inside, someone with access. His thoughts raced through the possibilities. Only a handful of people had ever laid eyes on that recipe. His executive chef, a few senior kitchen staff, a select few who had sworn an oath of secrecy, people he had trusted for years. The idea that one of them had betrayed everything Whitmore's table stood for, was almost unthinkable. Almost. The younger man at the table, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke, his voice edged with amusement. "So what's the play here? You keeping it to yourself? Or are we spreading the wealth?" The older man chuckled, swirling his drink before setting it down. "That depends. There are buyers, competitors who'd pay a fortune to get their hands on it. Imagine the headlines. The secret of Whitmore's table finally revealed." He sat back in his chair, watching the others' reactions with an air of satisfaction. "It's just business." James felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't just a stolen secret. This was a power play, a deliberate, calculated move to dismantle what he had built. His restaurant, his legacy, was being auctioned off like a commodity, and if he didn't act fast, it would be too late to stop it. He exhaled slowly, forcing his hands to relax as he folded the menu and placed it back on the table. His face remained neutral, unreadable, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Someone inside his walls had betrayed him, and he was going to find out who. James pushed back the swirling storm in his mind and steadied his breathing. He had heard enough, and the weight of the revelation sat heavy in his chest. Someone inside his restaurant, his kitchen, had sold out. The thought sickened him, but he couldn't afford to lose control, not yet. If these men believed they had the upper hand, he would let them think so. For now, with a measured exhale, he picked up his drink and rose from his seat, moving toward the table with a deliberate calm. The diners barely noticed him at first, lost in their smug conversation. Only when he pulled out the empty chair beside them did their laughter die down, replaced by fleeting surprise. The older man, the one leading the discussion, raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering in his eyes. James leaned in slightly, a casual smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "That's an interesting claim," he mused, voice smooth, unbothered. "I mean, the signature sauce? That's supposed to be untouchable." The table fell into a brief silence, a quiet assessment passing between the diners. Then the younger man, the one who had asked if they'd be spreading the wealth, chuckled under his breath. "Well," he said, dragging out the word as he took a slow sip of his drink, "nothing's untouchable if you know the right people." James tilted his head slightly, feigning interest. "And who exactly are these right people?" The woman smirked, crossing her legs as she leaned back. "Oh, now that's privileged information," she teased. "We don't just go handing that out to strangers." The older man, clearly the ringleader of this little operation, set down his drink and met James's gaze with a knowing look. "If we told you," he said, voice laced with amusement, "we'd have to make you part of the deal." James let out a low chuckle, shaking his head as if they had simply piqued his curiosity. "And what exactly does that deal look like?" The man's smirk deepened. "Depends. Some people want access. Others just want a piece of the profits. And some," he paused, swirling his glass, "just want to watch an empire fall." James's stomach clenched, but he kept his expression carefully neutral. These men weren't just looking to sell. They were looking to dismantle, to ruin what he had built. He had walked over expecting arrogance, maybe greed. But this was sabotage. He leaned back, nodding slowly, as if considering their words. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting." The older man watched him closely, eyes sharp. "You seem intrigued." James let a small smile touch his lips, but beneath the surface, his blood was running hot. He had heard enough. Now, it was only a matter of who had made this possible. And when he found out, there would be hell to pay. The woman smirked. "That, my friend, is what makes this deal special." She took a slow sip of her wine before tilting her head toward the older man. "Tell him." James leaned in slightly, bracing himself for whatever name would come next. The older man exhaled, almost lazily, before giving James exactly what he was waiting for. "Let's just say, your inside man isn't who you'd expect." He let the words hang for a moment before adding, "Ever heard of Daniel Cross?" James felt his pulse stutter for a fraction of a second. He forced his expression to remain neutral, but inside, his entire body went rigid. Daniel Cross, his executive chef, the man who had stood beside him in the kitchen for nearly a decade. It didn't make sense. Daniel had been there since the early days, back when Whitmore's Table was just one restaurant struggling to make a name for itself. They had spent countless late nights perfecting the menu together, tweaking recipes, testing flavors. Daniel knew how much this place meant to James, how much the legacy mattered. And yet, these men were sitting here, laughing over drinks, throwing his name around like a common criminal. James forced a chuckle, rubbing his chin as if contemplating their words. "I have to admit," he said smoothly, "that is surprising." The older man grinned, pleased with his reaction. "Surprising but useful. Loyalty only goes so far when money's on the table." James nodded slowly, but inside, his mind was already moving miles ahead. If Daniel Cross had really done this, if he had truly sold out everything they built together, then James wasn't just dealing with a stolen recipe. He was dealing with a betrayal he never saw coming. James let a slow, amused smirk play on his lips, the perfect mask for the rage simmering just beneath his skin. He could feel their eyes on him, measuring his reaction, gauging whether he was just another businessman looking for an edge or someone with deeper interests. He played his part well, tapping his fingers thoughtfully against the table as if genuinely considering their words. "So," he said, keeping his voice light, "let's say I was interested. What kind of opportunity are we talking about here?" The older man studied him for a moment, then leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel like a secret being passed along. "It's simple," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You get access to something that shouldn't exist outside of Whitmore's Table. You use it however you want. Compete, replicate, sell. Hell, you could even start your own chain if you had the right connections." James let out a thoughtful hum, as if he were actually considering the prospect. "And the source?" he asked. "I mean, something like this doesn't just fall into someone's lap." James barely remembered the drive back to headquarters. The city lights blurred past his windshield, his hands gripping the steering wheel with quiet restraint. His mind replayed the conversation over and over, dissecting every word, every smirk, every knowing glance. Daniel Cross. The name echoed in his skull like a relentless drumbeat. He wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But he had heard it with his own ears. By the time he reached Whitmore's table's headquarters, a sleek but understated building nestled in the heart of the city, he had made up his mind. This wasn't something he could handle alone. He needed his people, the ones he could still trust. Inside the executive conference room, James stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his reflection barely visible in the polished surface. One by one, his most trusted staff entered, his senior managers, his legal counsel, and finally his executive chef, Daniel Cross. James forced himself to meet his old friend's eyes, searching for something: guilt, denial, even surprise. But Daniel's expression was unreadable, a careful mask that only made James's stomach tighten further. The room settled into silence. The weight of James's presence was unmistakable. Everyone could feel it. Something was wrong. "I need all of you to listen carefully," James began, his voice measured, controlled. "Tonight, I overheard a conversation at one of our restaurants, a conversation about our signature recipe." A flicker of unease passed across the room. James let his words settle before continuing. "It wasn't speculation. It wasn't guesswork. They had it. Every detail. The proportions, the preparation, the exact final touch that makes it ours." Murmurs rippled through the group. His operations manager exchanged a tense glance with the head of security. His sous chef, a woman who had worked beside Daniel for years, looked visibly shaken. James pressed forward. "I played along. They were more than happy to talk. They mentioned an insider, someone feeding them this information. And when I asked for a name," his eyes locked onto Daniel's, sharp as a blade, "they said it was you." The room went completely still. Daniel blinked, his face paling slightly. He sat straighter in his chair, adjusting his posture as if shaking off an invisible weight. Then he let out a breath, slow and steady. "That's ridiculous," he said. "You know I would never." "Would you?" James cut in, his tone sharp, unyielding. "Because the way they spoke about you, it wasn't speculation. It wasn't a guess. It was a certainty." Daniel's fingers curled slightly against the table, but he didn't respond immediately. That hesitation sent a cold certainty through James's veins. There was something to this. James exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm, to give Daniel one last chance. "Tell me the truth," he said, "because if there's even a fraction of what they said that's real, I need to know, right now." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel swallowed, but the answer never came, and James had never felt more betrayed. The silence in the conference room was suffocating. James could hear nothing but the steady tick of the wall clock, each second stretching longer than the last. His eyes remained locked on Daniel, waiting for the man he had trusted for years to say something, anything, that would explain what he had just uncovered. Daniel shifted in his seat, his fingers pressing against the table as if he could steady himself against the inevitable. His eyes darted briefly to the others in the room, searching for support, for an escape. But no one spoke. No one came to his defense. "Daniel," James said, his voice calm but firm, "if you didn't do this, tell me now, because I swear, this is your last chance." For a moment, James thought he saw defiance flicker across Daniel's face, but then it crumbled. His shoulders sagged, and when he exhaled, it came out shaky, defeated. He dragged a hand down his face and let out a bitter chuckle, one that held no humor, only resignation. "They weren't supposed to find out this fast," Daniel muttered. The words hung in the air like a slow-moving blade. James felt something inside him go cold. The room remained deadly quiet as Daniel finally looked him in the eye. Really looked at him. "It wasn't just the recipe," Daniel admitted, voice hoarse. "It was the supply chain, the ingredients, the core of what makes Whitmore's table different from everyone else." James's breath came slower now, controlled. He didn't react. Not yet. He needed to hear everything. Daniel exhaled heavily, his hands curling into fists against the table. "They got to me months ago," he continued. "Verona Eats. They made an offer, not for a single recipe. They wanted everything, the unique ingredients we source, the exclusive vendors, the preparation techniques that no other restaurant can match." James clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of every word pressing down on him. "And you gave it to them." Daniel didn't even try to deny it. "Not at first," he muttered. "But they knew what they were doing. They sent someone who knew exactly what to say, exactly what to offer." His voice lowered. They knew about my debt, about the money I lost last year. They knew I needed a way out. James's stomach turned. This wasn't just betrayal, it was calculated sabotage. Verona Eats hadn't just wanted to steal from him. They wanted to gut Whitmore's table from the inside out. How much? James asked, his voice dangerously even. Daniel swallowed hard. Enough to keep me quiet. Enough to make it seem worth it. The room felt smaller now. The air thick with disappointment, anger, and something James refused to call heartbreak. You weren't just an employee, Daniel, James said, his voice quieter now, but carrying more weight than ever. You were my friend. Daniel looked away. He had nothing left to say. James sat back, the gravity of the situation finally settling in. This wasn't just about one stolen recipe. This was war. James sat alone in his office, the city lights casting a cold glow against the darkened windows. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the building's ventilation system and the occasional creak of his leather chair as he leaned back, fingers steepled in thought. The weight of the betrayal still clung to him, thick and suffocating, but anger would get him nowhere. He needed to be precise, calculated. His computer screen glowed softly, displaying a string of reports, internal files, and most disturbingly, evidence. Verona Eats hadn't just stolen from him. They had taken his signature creation, the culmination of years of dedication, and rebranded it as their own. Their newest promotional campaign was plastered all over their website. Introducing Verona's signature flavor. A secret no more. James's jaw clenched as he scrolled through their marketing materials. Pictures of glossy dishes drizzled in a familiar sauce, vibrant and rich, unmistakably his. It was being hailed as their exclusive new recipe, a culinary breakthrough that would redefine the dining experience. The audacity was staggering. They weren't just trying to compete, they were trying to erase Whitmore's table altogether. The reports from his investigators only made things worse. Verona Eats had been siphoning vendors, the same exclusive suppliers James had spent years forging relationships with. It wasn't just about stealing one thing. They were building an empire on the foundation he had laid. A slow breath escaped him, his fingers tightening into a fist against the desk. Verona Eats had planned this meticulously, moving piece by piece, knowing exactly where to strike. And Daniel, his Daniel, had been their inside man, feeding them the puzzle pieces they needed to dismantle Whitmore's table from within. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over the call button for his legal team. But no, not yet. This wasn't just about a lawsuit. This wasn't about dragging Verona Eats into a courtroom where they'd hide behind high-powered lawyers and fabricated contracts. No, James needed to crush them. His mind worked fast, shifting through scenarios. Verona Eats had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated him. They thought they had already won. They thought he would fold, that he would be too rattled by betrayal to strike back with full force. He smirked to himself, dark and unwavering. They were wrong. James clicked off the screen and reached for his notebook, flipping it open to a fresh page. It was time to move. If Verona Eats wanted war, they had just gotten one. James sat at the head of the long, polished conference table, the room buzzing with quiet tension. His legal team, PR specialists, and top chefs sat in silence, waiting for him to speak. He had spent the last 24 hours dissecting every angle, every possible reaction to Verona Eats' blatant theft. A lawsuit would take time, and time was exactly what Verona wanted. They wanted him tangled in litigation while they basked in the glow of their supposed breakthrough. No, James wasn't going to play defense. He was going to bury them. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. We don't fight this in a courtroom. We fight it where it matters, on the plate. The chefs exchanged glances, intrigued. The PR director adjusted his glasses. What are you proposing? James's lips curled into a slow, deliberate smirk. We let them think they won. Then we set the bar so high they can never reach it. The plan unfolded quickly. An exclusive event, one that would remind the world why Whitmore's table was an institution, not a trend. Verona Eats had stolen a great recipe, but James would unveil something greater. A new, refined version of the signature sauce. A version that elevated the original, making their copy instantly irrelevant. His head chef leaned in, his eyes sharp with excitement. We've been experimenting with an aged balsamic blend. Something richer, deeper. We could fine-tune it. James nodded. Good. I want perfection. No shortcuts. James nodded. Good. I want perfection. No shortcuts. The PR team chimed in, already working through the logistics. If we position this correctly, it won't just be a menu addition. It'll be an event. We make it exclusive. Invite high-profile food critics, influencers, celebrity chefs. We make this the meal that defines fine dining this year. A murmur of agreement swept through the room. The legal team, though initially skeptical, saw the brilliance in the move. And while we do that, one of the lawyers added, we gather enough evidence of their theft to hit them with legal action when they least expect it. James exhaled slowly, nodding. The pieces were falling into place. Verona Eats had thought they were leveling the playing field. They had no idea they had just challenged the master. The next week was a blur of high-level preparations. The best suppliers, the most renowned guests, every dish fine-tuned to perfection. The night of the event, cameras flashed as the who's who of the culinary world walked through the grand entrance. And when they tasted the new creation, a sauce that made everything before it obsolete, they knew. Whitmore's table wasn't just standing strong. It was untouchable. The evening air carried the familiar aroma of seared meats, simmering sauces, and fresh herbs. Inside Whitmore's table, the restaurant hummed with life, filled with the soft clinking of silverware, the gentle murmur of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter. It was exactly how James had always envisioned it. Warm, welcoming, and untouchable. But tonight it meant more than ever. Daniel was gone. The fallout had been swift and decisive. He had been dismissed immediately, escorted out of the building without ceremony. The legal team was already preparing the case against him and Verona Eats, and James had no doubt that when the dust settled, the damage to their reputation would be irreversible. But that wasn't where his focus was now. Standing near the entrance, he let his gaze sweep across the restaurant, taking in the faces of the people who had stayed. The ones who had always been here, not for money, not for some underhanded deal, but because they believed in what this place stood for. His head chef, the man who had worked tirelessly alongside him for years, was moving swiftly through the kitchen, his hands steady, his passion evident in every motion. His servers, who had been shaken by the betrayal but had never lost their dedication, were gliding between tables, ensuring each guest was treated like family. His loyal customers, the ones who had followed Whitmore's table from its first location to the empire it had become, were still here, because no matter what Verona Eats had tried to do, there were things that couldn't be stolen. James had spent the last few days making changes not just for protection but for the future. Security measures had been reinforced. The most sensitive parts of his business were now safeguarded like never before. But he hadn't just built walls, he had built trust. His staff had been rewarded, not just with words, but with actions. Bonuses for those who had stood by him, promotions for those who had proven their loyalty, and most importantly, a renewed commitment to ensuring that Whitmore's table remained what it had always been. A place built on honesty, passion, and something no rival could ever manufacture: authenticity. James exhaled slowly, the tension that had clung to him for weeks finally beginning to ease. He didn't need revenge. Verona Eats had already lost the moment they decided to imitate rather than create. Because in the end, recipes could be stolen, but true passion, that could never be replicated. And as James turned to watch a table of regulars savor their meals, smiling between bites, he knew one thing with certainty: Whitmore's table wasn't just back. It was stronger than ever. That's the story, friends. In the end, Whitmore's table didn't just survive. It came back stronger, proving that true passion and authenticity can't be stolen. This journey was about more than just a recipe. It was about loyalty, resilience, and the power of standing up for what you've built. If the story inspired you, made you think, or kept you on the edge of your seat, let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in James's position? Would you have fought back the same way? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more powerful stories like this, filled with twists, betrayals, and unexpected victories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. We've got even more incredible stories coming your way. Thanks for watching, and remember, greatness isn't just about what you create but how you protect it. See you in the next one.